Today, we're going to be talking about parts work in the brain. I'd love to share with you some of those keys to promoting brain change. We're going to be talking about two different places where neural networks show up, the witnessing self and the subcortical system. We're also going to be talking about the importance of compassion. Let's jump in. So, keys to brain change. I want to create an environment where it's very likely that I'm inviting my person's brain, if it's just right for them now, and I trust my client systems with so explicitly that if they tell me no, I'm good, no problem. But I'm going to try to create an environment where it's pretty likely that they're going to join me in experiential work, because experiential work is what's going to change the subcortical mind. The subcortical mind doesn't do a lot of thinking. It does a lot more feeling, metaphoring, imagery, sensing. And so if I want to talk to those networks, we're going to have to work a little bit more experiential. So I'm going to be inviting my clients to join me in some of that more body-oriented work, image-oriented work, maybe going inside, closing their eyes. And parts work is great for this because parts work is hyper-experiential. I also want to make sure we have self-compassion on board, because getting compassion from me and getting compassion from themselves is going to create a space that's going to send soothing neurochemicals to my client's subcortical brain. We also want a space of optimal arousal. So when I say that, what I mean is I want a brain that is experiencing enough stress, enough challenge, that it's worthwhile to change. Brains in general like to do what they do. It's just their natural wiring. So in order to change, in order to learn something new, which is a pretty calorically expensive activity, in order to change, what they're gonna need is to have a little bit of stress in the system to make it worthwhile. But we also want an intact brain on board, so optimal arousal also includes a ton of safety. So what we're going to be playing with throughout this course is getting that space just right, where we have that optimal arousal, enough stress that there's challenge, enough safety that we keep a brain intact. And you're also going to be seeing me go through skill, practice, state, trait. If what we want is to create a new neural network pattern, what we want to do is have a new skill and then move that skill into a practice that can be executed over and over and over again, usually for a 3 to 5 week period. And then what is created is a neurological state. Now I have a long-term potentiation pattern set up in the brain, and I can access that state regularly, and all the knowings of that state just come online once I have had enough practice. And if a person were to practice bringing on that state over and over again regularly, it would eventually become a trait, a part of who they are, and then it would come up without conscious need to bring it up. So let's say I was working with somebody, let's put that out of idea and into clinical land. Let's say I was working with somebody who was really working on self-compassion, and they noticed they had an inner critic voice. And we developed a brand new skill. We did some boundary work inside, like we're going to do, and they had a new skill where they put a pause, really kind, soft pause between their inner critic voice and what the inner critic voice kept saying. So as soon as they heard it, they just said, "Oh, Jules, stop." So that's their practice. Okay, here's a brand new skill. We're going to go poof. And they say that over and over and over again. "Jules, stop. It's okay. Say it. Maybe you're onto something, but say it different. Say it kinder," right? So they're in that practice and they're executing that practice for 3 to 5 weeks. Now I have a state on board that can automatically know, oh yeah, I learned to talk to myself harshly. We're really practicing not doing that. Here's another way to speak the truth without the harshness. And here we go. And we're going to embed that until 2-3 years down the road, it becomes a trait. And now it's actually a natural part of how I talk to me. even how I talk to my own harsh voice if there's a little remnant of that still there. So those are the 4 elements that are going to help you really move your work in a way that we're supporting brain change. You're going to support experiential work. You're going to support compassion, taking in yours, and also self-compassion between your client and themselves. We're going to be promoting optimal brain arousal state, a little bit of stress, a lot of safety. And we're going to be really looking at putting skill practice into their lives so that they can start creating states and eventually change their brain in permanent ways. Now let's jump into the witnessing neural network. So there's a part of your brain called the orbital medial prefrontal cortex and ventral medial prefrontal cortex. And you'll see in this drawing they overlap a little bit. And those parts of the brain are really good at watching the rest of the data of the mind. So I think of my job like one of my main jobs is to help a client safely watch their own mind, to bear witness to themselves. As soon as that little third eye position comes online and is running a lot of electricity and energy and information flow through it, what it's doing is it's gathering that data, but there's a pause between the data and what we do next. So if we want to pause between what we feel and what we do, what we're going to want is a little more activation in this witnessing neural network. The other great thing about that network is that it is going to be one of our keys to developing self-compassion. One interesting thing about that part of the brain is that there is a little commissure, is what it's called. Think of it just as a little road, that there's a connection between the hemispheres right there at that spot, that connection does not require information and energy to flow back through the corpus callosum. They can talk directly to each other. So the right hemisphere way of seeing the world and the left hemisphere way of seeing the world actually can organize really fast in that particular area of the brain. So that's the witnessing neural network. Now let's think about subcortical neural networks for a minute. So the subcortical neural networks would be involving brainstem and midbrain knowing, and that knowing feeds up into what's generally thought of as the limbic system, the mentalization neural networks, default mode networks, basal ganglia. Don't worry about remembering all the fancy words. All you have to do is just think about, subcortical mind. Now, something interesting about your subcortical mind is implicit memory. Implicit memory is a different kind of memory than explicit. So think about explicit as like, I remember George Washington was the first president of the United States. I don't remember that because I was there. I remember it because I was told it and I believed it, and here we are. Or I remember what happened on my birthday last year. That's autobiographical memory, and it's explicit. I can actually remember, okay, that's where we went, and there I am. So those are explicit memories. Implicit memory is very, very different. When an implicit memory is active, your brain actually does not experience it as memory. It experiences it as truth about the way the world works. Let's slow down there for just a second. So it's a memory, and it holds all these emotional knowings about who you are, how relationships function, whether or not there's gravity. That's part of all of that implicit sea like ocean. And how I like to think of this is actually a psychological floor. The reason I like that metaphor is that it is as real as the floor you are walking on. These learnings, these emotional knowings that came from your history are completely unquestioned, and you don't even really have to think about them to walk. You just know that's where they are, and we walk on it. And to us, our implicit memory feels like reality. It feels as real as the floor you're on. That's really good most of the time. So if you actually saw the world like you did when you were just first born, light, shadow, color, movement, if you actually did see the world before you had a ton of this implicit memory laid down, like my 1-year-old did when she was looking at grass, and she's 7 now, she doesn't think about grass anymore, but when she was 1, it was touching it and feeling it and being with it and rolling in it and putting it in her mouth, and she didn't know what it was. Now it's grass and she runs on it and moves on. And that's great because now she can learn maths, and she couldn't if she was still examining the grass with that kind of level of detail. And both things are really helpful, right? If we didn't have this way of using categorical thought and emotional knowings to organize our world, we would see this earth as chaos, light, shadow, and probably be too freaked out to even move. Thank goodness we have implicit memory, and I can look at this room and I can see you and imagine us being together, and I can remember every moment of teaching I've ever done, and I can look at the chair in front of me and go sitting thing and move on, and I don't have to examine it like my kiddo did when she was really little. And there's some hard news too about the psychological floor. So if I grew up in a space where it was really adaptive back then, it was high benefit to me to really hate myself, then I'm going to hate myself today and walk on that like it's truth, like I'm a hateable person, like of course there's no other way to think. And all of that kind of learning that our clients are bringing in, when I think of a couple coming in where they're riding on all of these old knowings about how conflict works or whether or not repair is possible, and those old knowings are driving everything they're thinking and feeling, but they don't even really know that it's coming from memory. So for us as therapists, a lot of the time it's old learnings that are the target of our work, and they're held in this subcortical brain. So when I'm talking about subcortical neural networks, that's usually what I'm talking about. I'm talking about targeting a learning that was really helpful at some time. Otherwise, they wouldn't have it. I don't think we do things that are highly costly unless they're also highly beneficial. And probably my client's circumstances have changed, and so that old learning is not serving them like it did back then. And so that's going to be the target of a lot of our work, is how do I help that subcortical part that just emotionally knows this thing take in new information and unlearn what was or learn new. In order to make changes in the subcortical floor, what I'm going to need to do is differentiate between the witnessing self and the subcortical knowings. And then I'm going to want to have a link between them. Now, compassion is really helpful in that link between them. But sometimes my clients link through judgment instead. And what I tell them, guys, is this. If you want to light your lower brain on fire, judge yourself. If you want to send like soothing, cooling water to your lower brain, you love yourself. It's really that easy. One of my go-to questions, just to find out, is a question that is an assessment, and it is also an intervention. It's, how do you feel towards? How do you feel towards is a really interesting question, because the part of my brain that is called forth to answer it is this third eye position right here. So just by asking, how do you feel towards that thought you just shared with me? Let's say a client shared a thought, oh, I just feel like I should leave him. I can't stand my husband anymore. I hear that and I say, oh, how do you feel towards yourself as you hear that thought come up? I think I should leave him. What I'm asking is for their witnessing mind to come online and ask, how do you feel towards the rest of your brain? So this question is really interesting because on the one hand, it's an assessment question. I can tell by the way they answer if there is a separation already, if they already have that differentiation between the witnessing mind and the subcortical mind. But it's also an intervention question because just asking it asks electricity and energy and information flow to run in that third eye position. So for people who have real trouble accessing that witnessing self, running electricity in that part of the brain, just asking that question often can really help. If they answer me, oh, I hate that, that tells me a lot about how their brain is orienting towards their subcortical mind. It's probably orienting in judgment, and that means that electricity and energy information flow is excitatory. Just means neurochemicals that are going are turning on that lower mind. And so it's a really good way to make sure that we keep everything in a really fiery, unsafe space. So very likely what my brain's going to do is to become less integrated if that's what's going on. Now let's look for just a second at the compassion neural network. So if you look at this drawing, what you'll see is these pink areas here are the parts that are giving that GABA flow, that's an inhibitory neurochemical, to the subconscious parts. Those are the blue parts. So you'll see these little half moon areas on the sides of the prefrontal cortex and that middle area. And they work together and they go, shh, they send calming neurochemicals to the anterior cingulate cortex, the insular cortex, and to the amygdala. And so all of these little half moon parts are going to calm down that lower system when we do have self-compassion. So we are aiming for that. And if my client has a system that's having trouble with that, it tells me I'm going to need to do some internal boundary work to help them out in order to increase self-compassion. Sometimes I have clients ask me, why are we doing this parts work? And you want me to talk to my inner child, or you want me to talk to my subconscious mind, huh? And I'm really leaning into all of the neuroscience we've been talking about already. Parts work changes the brain, and how it does it is it separates out the witnessing mind from the subcortical mind, and parts work is all about building this compassion witnessing self instead of judgment witnessing self. So when I think about how does parts work change the mind, oh, well, it's going to change it by separating out, differentiating the witnessing self, and then sending calming neurochemicals to the subcortical brain. All that's behind what I actually say to the client, which most of them do not want this level of information. So what I say instead is, well, let's look at our hand model of the brain. This part knows what you learned as a kid. This part knows what you learned as a kid plus what's happening now. And if you want this part to change so you're not hurting so much, we need this part to talk to this part. And so that's parts work. So a lot of times that's how I'll say it. Or I may even say it simpler because I've seen it change so many minds. I know it'll probably work here too.